Bret Bielema came out during the spring meetings this week, and of course, we continue along the lines of SEC Big Ten rivalry. We know that the SEC has been a better conference on the field generally over the last 10 to 15 years. I would say strictly in the last 10 years, there's been no doubt about it. But when we look at the secondary competition off the field for rear ends in the seats, eyeballs on TV, and money, these two conferences are, by any measurement of those three, they're not even close to the rest of the other Power 5 conferences who are trying to maintain it. So the SEC generally has a slight advantage over the Big Ten, but if you look at attendance, money, and eyeballs on TV ratings, those two conferences are dominating college football, and the gap is growing. So Bret Bielema talking on-field competition. We know that these two conferences have for a long time, going back to the early 90s, had a 3-bowl contract, unlike really any two conferences out there, and it's been extended on and on and on because of the success of the Capital One Bowl, the Citrus Bowl at different points depending on the naming conventions, and of course the Outback Bowl, and in recent years the Gator Bowl. So would you like to see, Mike, the SEC and the Big Ten have a contract to play specific games, maybe full throttle, 14 on 14 for 2 weeks to start the season, or maybe one particular week? Would that be good? You know where I vote on this one.
Yeah, the answer is no, and here's why the answer to that is no. Because the SEC is really the only conference that markets itself as a conference. I think the other conferences are starting to, particularly the Big Ten. And one of the benefits of the SEC teams getting into Texas and playing the Big 12 teams, Tennessee played Oklahoma, Arkansas played Texas Tech, so getting into those Texas markets, one of the benefits of the SEC teams going west and playing teams in the Pac-12 market, getting into the California market, is they can showcase the SEC in those fertile recruiting grounds, in those markets where they don't have teams based. I think it's great and healthy for the SEC to have 3 or 4 teams play ACC teams to get in the Atlanta and the South Florida market. 2 or 3 teams play Big 12 teams to get in that Texas market. 2 or 3 teams to play in the Pac-12 market to get to that West Coast market, and then 2 or 3 teams to play the Big 12. I think the SEC, from a conference leadership and a conference management perspective, has really cracked the code before the other conferences in the distribution of how they schedule their out-of-conference P5. I think it would be a very bad idea for the SEC to lock themselves into a basketball-type SEC Big Ten showdown. You can do that in basketball because you have X number of out-of-conference games. You can kind of run simultaneous tournaments. I think it would be a bad idea to do it in football for the reasons I just stated.
I'm going to go kind of the opposite direction because I know Mark's probably going to be in favor of this, but I mean, here's the thing. I think what Bielema was trying to get at, and he had made the comment of doing 7 one weekend and 7 the next weekend, and kind of pointed out that the SEC East has a lot of matchups against ACC teams, and geographically it makes sense, and I get that. And I do think that, the SEC, for what it's worth, it does catch a lot of flack as far as its schedule weakness. And Mark, I know this is something you've pointed out in the past that we've had shows on. Later in the season when teams are really ramping up their competition, and October, November seems to be a time when you get the FCS or the cupcake team kind of slides in, and that tends to happen in the SEC. And a lot of the thought process is the SEC sometimes kicks off their season a little bit earlier. Also, the fact that the SEC plays SEC teams, so there's no need to schedule tougher teams. But I think that with this 14 playoff situation and the fact that we all know at some point it's going to grow in the future, the more teams that you can put yourself up against, as far as Power 5 teams are concerned, I think the better off you are. And yes, you're going to have to win your conference, and don't get me started on that because I'll start bashing the fact that there's not a conference championship in one of the Power 5 conferences at this point. But I do feel like you have to I do feel like you're going to have to do that. And it already is slated, if you're an SEC team, that you have to schedule a Power 5 school. Okay, we know that it's part of the scheduling, and that's in place. Now, whether that's Purdue to, say, Iowa State to, and these are the weaker teams in Power 5 conferences. Just because they're in a Power 5 doesn't mean they're good. But I think the whole thing is that, and he's thinking of it from a business aspect, and most people don't realize this about Bielema, but he does have a marketing and business background. That's what his major was in college. The guy is very calculated with everything he does, including his little YouTube channel thing that he's got going now that, being Bret Bielema, everything is extremely calculated with this man. And it's something of that type of magnitude where you have SEC, Big Ten, think about how much you could market that. Think about how huge that would be if you had two big – good job. If you had two very big conferences opening up the first 2 weeks in college football, much like basketball is what he's thinking about. So I do see where there's a benefit to it, but like Mike, I like the fact that the SEC goes out and schedules in Arizona State, or they schedule in Arizona. I would like to see more SEC USC matchups like we're going to see at the start of this season. But I really, out of all of it, I want to see the top of the Power 5 go at the top of the Power 5. That's what I would really like to see. I would like to see some way, form, or fashion for there to be some type of ranking, and we put these guys up against each other to kick off the season. I don't care if it's Big Ten, Pac, whatever, ACC. Let's put the big guys up against the big guys and kick off the season right. I'm tired of having all the discussions and the debates on Twitter about could Oregon beat this team, would Oregon beat this team if they were in the SEC, or vice versa. Let's just go ahead and knock it out. And, I think that something like this where he's talking about doing a Big Ten, you've got guys out there who are Ohio State fans who are always talking about, well, if Ohio State was in SEC, they would dominate, blah, blah, blah. Well, let's put the money where the mouth is and let's just go with it. I want to see the big teams go up against them. And I know Sankey came out and said, well, we typically call that bowl season. I get it, ha-ha, funny. But let's see it happen during the regular season a little bit more, because that's what makes college football fun.
Yes, and this probably hits me at the perfect time because Florida's out-of-conference schedule this year is so bad that I wouldn't mind seeing, if they did have a Big Ten challenge, this year would be the perfect year for it. I don't think it needs to be an every year thing. I don't know if that was Bielema's point or not. A 1 year deal wouldn't bother me one bit. It would be nice to see bigger games, and I don't want these to be neutral site games either. And Sankey said, like he said, that's what we call bowl season. No, it would be nice to have these matchups in the Swamp, in Athens, in the Horseshoe, in Ann Arbor, in these big stadiums that these teams are known for. And, it's what makes college football great, these big games. And like I said, it probably hits me the perfect time when Florida's schedule is so weak. No, Mike, I see you shivering in there. Games played in September.
It's cold up there.
Yeah, but it does get on my nerves, too, to see these games late November. Florida State's coming up the next week. And this year we get Florida and listen to it, Presbyterian. Yeah, that's going to be a 90,000-seat stadium filled to about 60,000 capacity. Those games get on my nerves so much, and these, if you want to call it challenges, would help fix that issue a little bit. Florida's going to keep Florida State. Then you would have a mandatory Big Ten, Pac-12, Big 12 school. So, I do like the idea of SEC Big Ten, but I would like to see it rotate as well. It needs to be Pac-12 the next year, Big 12 the next year, ACC the next year, and kind of a rotation, not necessarily SEC Big 10 every year.
Mike, I totally get it from the standpoint of what does the SEC have to gain out of this, because when it comes to reputation on the field and respect from the College Football Committee, the SEC stands on the most firm ground of any conference. So they don't need to go out and prove anything. I think if the SEC played a nobody out of conference this season, the SEC champion would still be ushered into the college football playoff until it's proven that the SEC has declined, which it hasn't. The SEC is going to be given more favor than the other conferences to get to the college football playoff, and if you base it on track record, they've earned that. I would like to see it taken season to season, but based on track record, the SEC has earned it. And you make a great point in regards to footprints, the ACC footprint, the Big 12 footprint, and now we even see the Pac-12 footprint where Bama's gone to California, most successfully Tennessee to a certain extent, and even Ole Miss in this last recruiting class, and is starting to pluck away some of the better California players. going to the Big Ten outside of Ohio and Pennsylvania, it would be the lesser of the 5 conferences in regards to a recruiting footprint. So there's really nobody that the SEC needs to pull out of the Big Ten country or footprint. And again, maybe a couple of Ohio kids skip off to Kentucky, and I know Alabama's pulled a few, but that's very scarce. So nothing to gain for the SEC, but as a football fan, would love to see it. And again, those are the 2 power brokers in college football, the SEC and the Big Ten, and I would love to see them battle it out more often in some of these great stadiums. And that was a good point by David. Yeah, we see the opening affair at Cowboys Stadium, and we see the bowl games, but we know and question once we get to bowl competition how much motivation there is. I would think that there would be a lot, but we all know that there are varying levels of motivation based on the season and the expectations. Why not play it when we know, hey, it counts and everybody's motivated and everybody's healthy?
That was a great point by David, having the home and aways. We see a lot of neutral site games early in the season. Tennessee, for the past 4 seasons, has done home and aways with Oregon and Oklahoma to a great deal of success. Even when Tennessee was struggling 4 years ago, strong traveling contingent out of Oregon. It was great for Tennessee fans to see Outson and to get out to Oregon and see that football. And the home and away with Oklahoma the past 2 years was great for both fan bases. Oklahoma checkerboarded their stadium 2 years ago. Tennessee checkerboarded our stadium last year. There was a lot of back and forth between those 2 fan bases. It was great to have the home and away rather than neutral site. Dave, I couldn't agree more with you there.
And I thought it was basically criminal, as I may have stated 3 or 4 or 30 times on this show a couple of years ago, that the Pac-12 and the SEC were most likely the 2 best conferences 2 years ago. They didn't play each other at all. 0. Didn't play each other in the postseason. Nothing. It's just these teams don't get together enough, and it's the greatest sport on earth. It's just mismanaged, and there's a number of issues involved in college football.